off with the discussion in this video, I would like to mention a few points before we begin. Although this video is titled Array versus Strings, the knowledge of arrays is not a must. It's not a requirement, although the knowledge is preferred. Because this video is structured as arrays versus strings, therefore, if you know arrays from beforehand, then it would help you understand the aspects of strings better, right? Even if you don't know array, then you can simply ignore the column for arrays and just concentrate on the column for strings, right? Because in this video I have stressed on strings rather than on arrays. Arrays has just been explained so as to have a point of differences between them, right? Now, this video covers the basics of both arrays and strings. Therefore, if you already know arrays, then it would be a quick recap for you. Moreover, if you don't know arrays, then you can basically learn both arrays and strings through the help of this video. All right. Now, I would suggest that while watching this video, you sit down with a pen and paper and note down the points that you see on the screen that would help you later on. Right. So please do that. Please sit down with a pen and paper and jot down the points that you see on the screen. Moreover, although this video discusses about the syntactical differences and the different methods that we have on arrays and strings, yet if you don't understand a few things, that's completely all right. It's your first time, and this, many of the viewers, for them, it's their first time watching a video on strings. So go through this video a couple of times, give it time, and you will eventually understand the concepts better. And I would tell this from beforehand. This is much easier than the searching and the sorting algorithms that you have or have not or will do later on. Right. So let's begin with the video, shall we? All right. So. In the first point, we would like to discuss the differences in the declaration of arrays and strings. So we declare arrays through the general syntax of as follows. We start off with a data type, and then we write the identifier followed by a pair of square brackets. All right. Now, an example of this would be int ARR empty square bracket terminator. Now, in a similar manner, we can also define or declare strings in this case, right? So we can declare strings using the following general syntax. We begin or start off with the identifier string, followed by the name of an identifier, and then followed by a terminator, kind of like declaring of any other variable of a primitive type, all right? An example of this would be string name, for example, string school, etc. All right. So this was the differences between the declaration in arrays and strings. Moving on, we have a few points that I would like to discuss on the declaration aspect of both arrays and strings. So if you notice that we haven't really put any elements in the string or in the array. And these two things are basically null references. The declarations are null references because we have not allocated any memory using the new operator. Right? Therefore, if you try to access any element in the array or in the string, or if you try to access the length attribute on an array, or if you try to call the length method or any other method, for example, on the string, what we would end up having is that we would get an exception if you run the program that a null pointer exception has occurred for both strings and arrays. You would not end up with any compilation errors as such, but when you run the program, you would get a null pointer exception. All right. So therefore, you should keep this in your mind that if you're getting such kind of an exceptions, then you should really check the part where you are initializing your variables. Now, if you have not initialized your variables, or if you have forgot to take input in a variable, you would definitely end up with a null pointer exception. So there's no need to freak out. Just check the part of the code which is responsible for taking inputs and see if you have actually taken inputs or not. All right. Moving on with initialization of arrays and strings. Now, we can initialize arrays in two ways, in one of the two ways. The first way is through the help of initializers. Now, we use this particular approach of initializing arrays when the contents of the arrays are known from beforehand. For example, say we want to create an array, in the example that's provided, we wanted to create an array that would hold the number of days in a month. Now, the number of days in a month is fixed, right? June begins with 31 and March begins with 31, right? All with the exception of February, which may either have 29 days or 28 days, depending upon whether the year is a leap year or not, right? So if you already know the elements that are going to be stored in the array from in advance, then it's better to use initializers to initialize that array, right? Now, in a similar fashion, we can also initialize strings in cases where we already know the contents of the string in advance. And that approach of creating strings are known as implicit creation of a string. The general syntax for that would be string followed by the name of the variable, or in other words, it's called an identifier, equals a string literal, which is enclosed, which is a group of characters that is enclosed within double quotes. This is very important. String literals are groups of characters which are enclosed within double quotes. If you miss on the double quotes, you're going to end up with a compilation error, right? Now, an example of this would be, for example, my name. If I want to store my name in a variable, then I would write this string name equals double quote open Ronojoy Shata, right? That's an example of creating a string implicitly. Now, there's a second method of creating an array too. So we can create an array using the new keyword. Now, using the new keyword, this method is preferred when we want to take input in the array, where the content of the array is not known in advance. So, for example, if we wanted to create an array of type int having the size of 5, then we would write int arr square brackets equals new int size 5, right? Now, in a similar fashion, we can also create a string using the new keyword, and that approach is named explicit creation of a string. Now, the general syntax for that would be as follows. We would begin off or start off with string, followed by the name of the variable, equals new string, bracket open, because I can fit in that part there, text terminated, right? And an example of this, let me try to let me write the assignment creation of a variable called name and assign it my name, right? Using the explicit creation approach. So string name equals new string, and inside of this brackets or the parenthesis, I'm going to write my name. I'm going to write $, because I don't have much space left here in this line, right? So this is the explicit creation of a string. Moreover, we can also create a string from a character array. That also falls under the explicit creation of a string. Now, to create a string from this character array, which contains the characters BLUE, we would create a string as follows, as displayed in the explicit creation, and we would just pass in the name of the array, and the name of the array is CHR. And if we go on to print the value of color, we would see that blue has been printed, right? And knowing this, you could, for example, reduce your program size of using a for loop to just using this line. For example, I'm going to cover a few programs next where we would require to convert a string to a character array, do some modifications in the array, and then reconvert the character array back to a string. So there, if we know the explicit creation of a string, then it would basically save us writing a for loop, right? So this was creating a string from character arrays, right? So let's